want to quickly remind everyone to please mute yourself during the presentation so we can all hear the presenter. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation, so during that time, I would encourage anyone interested in asking something, please unmute yourselves or type your questions in the chat, and then I'll read them for you. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared through the ADWR YouTube page for those who missed it. I'm going to provide a brief Water Awareness Month introduction, and then we can continue with the webinar. The Arizona Department of Water Resources and our water conservation partners from around the state invite you, your family, and your neighbors to join in the celebration of Water Awareness Month, or WAM as we like to call it. The WAM website was first launched in 2011 and is overflowing with ideas and activities to help you learn more about water conservation and become more aware of our state's most precious resource, water. The availability and quality of our water supply is critical to our quality of life. Therefore, this essential and precious resource was recognized by Arizona's governor in 2008 with an executive order that designates April as Water Awareness Month. Many thanks to Arizona's water awareness partners from around the state who contribute events, tips, and resources to the website and help promote water awareness. Next, I would like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar titled We Water People with Grand Canyon National Park Service, Jason Nez with the Grand Canyon National Park Service. He is currently an archaeologist, specifically a fire archaeologist at Grand Canyon National Park, where he works with both the Science and Resource Management and Fire and Aviation Division to assist in the preservation and protection of cultural and natural resources. Additionally, he works to train other fire personnel and Science and Resource Management staff in using their skills on fire lines to protect resources. In the past 20 years, he has also been an NPS interpretive ranger and worked for various federal agencies and cultural resource management companies, including the former Navajo National Archaeology Department. In his off time, he is working the family ranch with his horse Whiskey. Welcome, Jason. Thank you very much for joining us today, and over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Jason Nez, and as was mentioned, I'm an archaeologist here at Grand Canyon National Park. And the Nenishle, Nonish, Ejitkopahanishle do Ozeshi, Bashinshin, Tratnesatni Dashiche do, Nankadina Dashinelle. Ajit, Twinis Dizido, Shata Ate, Second would ye, I see Nasha. So my name's Jason Nez, and I'm Zuni Edgewater, born for the Salt Clan. My mother's father's is Tingle people. My father's Mexican people, and I'm from Coal Mine Mesa, south of Tuba City. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about water and art, specifically prehistoric art. As an archaeologist, I've analyzed thousands, if not millions, of sherds, and I've walked across the landscape. I've surveyed almost everywhere in the state, so I've gotten pretty good insight about what's out there. So can we go to the next slide? Oh, there's my clan. Next. So first off, we talk about identity. We talk about water, and we come across this term a lot. We use it Navajo. People have different opinions about it, but in its origin, it was originally a Tewa word for irrigated fields. So when the Spaniards would ask about who was living off to the north, they would say Apaches de Navajo, which is the Apaches of the irrigated fields. So even in our beginning, we've had a history of this relationship with water. Next. And we're born of water, and in our earliest existence in my culture, we recognize that life comes from water. At one point, we were mist beings, like the mist at waterfalls or the mist at rapids. We were just these foam ideas floating around with no real shapes or bodies, but over time, we've ascended into these upper worlds, and we've evolved into our current forms. Next. And for those in Phoenix and throughout the country and throughout the world, I think you're probably aware of irrigation ditches and water control from prehistoric cultures. And our great indigenous civilizations couldn't have been possible without water. I think we quickly learned how to harness water, and here in the Southwest, it's the only way we're able to survive. Next. So places like Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, in northern Mexico, Paquime, out in the Mississippi, Cahokia, Etowah, And again, in south of us in Tenochtitlan and Machu Picchu, there's evidence of complex waterworks, of complex irrigation systems that it took native scientists, native hydrologists to figure out, to test, to see what worked, and use it for a growing population. Next, please. And when it comes to art, especially modern art, art is often a reflection of the world around us. And I'm sure we've all seen pottery on the landscape. And for a lot of us Native Americans, for some of us, we like to leave those things alone. And in place, they have a lot of meaning and context. But if we're out moving them around, if we're taking them, we can damage the integrity of the information that comes from it. We can damage its meanings if we remove them. So if you see these sherds out there, especially some of the ones I'm going to show you, and you happen to interact with them, just please put them back where you found them and tell an archaeologist. Some of us love to talk about it. So a lot of pottery out there is labeled. Our pottery has landscapes drawn on it and it has meanings. Next. And I remember some years ago, I was thinking about going to U of A, and I was in their ceramic lab. And a pot was brought out, this Salado polychrome bowl, and I was looking at it. And as I was standing there at U of A, I had this revelation. Next slide. So as I'm looking at it, trying to figure it out, I sort of shrunk down and I saw myself as a tiny person inside the pot. And I realized that the designs on the interior were landscapes. They were waves that in order to see what the design was, I had to look at it from the inside out, literally thinking inside the pot. Next. And it opened up this whole new way of looking at ceramics that I think some of us may have came to this ourselves. Some of us, it was taught to us by our culture. But if we look at the designs from the inside out, all of a sudden, the way we see it change, the perspective changes. So we see textile blankets hanging on the walls of our structures. We see clouds and weather patterns on the horizons around us, specifically 4 of them. And looking at things from the inside out made me realize that we need to change our perspectives. Next slide. And I firmly believe that our prehistoric ancestors had intended for us to learn from the things they left behind. There's different stories about the artifacts we find out there, but there's a value in the education. There's a value in the knowledge we get from some of these designs if we learn how to interpret them. If we look at this particular vessel that came from here at Grand Canyon, you can see that in the top middle, that if you look at it from above, the perspective is different. If you look at it from the side, the perspective is different. But if you look at it as a whole, you'll see that it could be waves on the river. It could be, if you look in Google Earth and you look down from above, down into the canyon, you'll see the river going around rocks, meandering, going through deep holes and coming out. And I think that that's what these people were trying to convey to us. They labeled the pottery as moisture, as water. And if you filled a pot, like in the upper middle picture, and that was full of water, you would see that the design swirls around it. You can see the design on the neck. So if that vessel was full of water, it would indicate that that's the way water flows. You whirlpools, it boils, it bubbles up, and all of that is shown. And if you look at some of the design elements, like those little pendant dots on the triangles, they're showing us the little bubbles. And I mentioned earlier about part of our Navajo culture is that we used to be those mist beans, those froth on waves. And that's what they're showing us. Like they're showing us, this is what you came from, and this is how you use this vessel. Next, please. And that change of perspective really changes the way I look at things. And I started to look at the art I encounter when I'm doing my job, and I started to see stories and places. And this particular vessel here at the Museum in Northern Arizona, um, I have my digitized version here, but you can see that there's waves swirling around, and in the middle, there's some sort of structure. There's some sort of place there. And in my Navajo culture, when the humans first emerged from underneath, they built the planning house, and that would have been in the middle of where the rivers were coming together, sort of at a place like this. Next, please. And it's reflected in our art. Water and all the forms associated with water, frogs, water plants, it's part of our artwork, it's part of our ceremonial life, and it's part of our daily thought processes. This is just a commercial sand painting, but you can see the emphasis on water beings, frogs. You can see the emphasis on the center of everything there, and the reeds and water plants too. Next, please. And in our designs, this is just a commercial reproduction of a sand painting design, but you can see that the waters are swirling around, and in the middle is sort of our emergence place, the little blue dot, and all the plants and all the life is coming out of that. All the wind is coming out of that. We were quite aware of some of these scientific processes like meandering water, Coriolis effect. We were and the rainbows that form at mist. You can see the rainbow person around the edges there. And a lot of that is just us remembering what we were and who we are. 75% water. We're mostly water. Next, please. So we're connected to that water, and we see it expressed in a lot of our prehistoric art, specifically rock art and pottery, where our existence, we're beings born of water. And in our art, whether we realize it or not, the memory is in us. We can't escape it. We dream of it. We hear of it. I love, sometimes I'll have a good dream of the ocean when I'm out there on fire assignments, and I can hear that surf booming, and I wake up. It's like, oh, cool. I need to go back to the ocean and pray over there. So next slide, please. So across the world, different cultures express it in different ways. And you can see from this picture, this painting from the 1830s, that massive waves and froth and landscapes are an important part of cultures even across the oceans. Next, please. And in our culture, as I'm looking through pottery, as I'm looking through ceramics from the development of ceramics around 500 AD all the way to its high point in our modern times, I can see those same elements. I can see it evolve. So, excuse me. So in the upper left, we can see a ceramic vessel from the Pueblo I period, and we see triangles with dots with straight line ticks on it. And then it goes to the right, and you can see that water is expressed in a different way. There's actual swirls, there's waves, and there's froth in the form of dots. And there's this ripple effect in the way that it's painted in the top middle. And then that evolves later in the Pueblo II to Pueblo III period, we call it. And you can see those scrolls that look like waves. They look like water flowing around. And that becomes a predominant art element in that time period. And then in the bottom right, you can see that it gets even more complicated. And all of a sudden, we have waves, we have negative lightning on vessels we use to scoop water. And that particular vessel is a scoop that you would get water out to drink it. So they want water there, they're thinking of water there, and that could be an indication of what's going on in that world at that time. Is it was dry, people were thirsty a lot, and they thought of water. And later that evolved in the late Pueblo III period, and you can see in the bottom left that it's more intricate. The water swirls are more intricate. They're thinking of rivers, they're thinking of waves, they're thinking of oceans. And that's just sort of how ceramics developed over time. Is we want water, we're thinking of water, and it just became a part of our art. Next, please. And we look at common sherds, and when we see them in their full form, like I think of Southwest natives as we're thirsty people. I grew up farming and ranching with my grandparents, and a lot of those days I was thinking of water. I would think about where I was born in California and remember the ocean and how cold it is when it's Arizona 105-degree day, and I want to go over there. And learning how to make pottery, learning how to analyze pottery designs, I see it everywhere. We see the coils around this corrugated vessel from Navajo National Monument, and I guess we could just see coils, but I see waves coming into shore. I see waves moving across the horizon. And if you fill that vessel with water and from above, it would look like waves rippling outward. And if you know how to make these types of vessels, if you fill it with water and overflow, the action of water flowing over that ripple surface creates this beautiful optical effect. Next, please. And in the early period, some of the expressions of water was things related to water, like weather. And in this case, in this lino black on gray vessel, I believe that they're showing us lightning. I think that in the early periods, lightning was powerful. It still is powerful. It's to be respected. And that would bring, having it around would bring moisture and water to our dry farms that we had out here. Next, please. And later that type develops into this Kana'a type. And you can see that there's little, not necessarily waves, but these triangular elements, which could be interpreted as waves inside of this scoop for getting water. And the little ticking that probably was how they were representing froth on water. Next, please. Over time, it gets bolder and people get more intricate in describing what they're seeing. So this particular vessel that also came from Grand Canyon, you can see from above, there's that hole, which would be full of water, and then the swirl around it. And then if you go out a little even further, there are swirls with the bold elements and the little pendant dots that represent froth. Next, please. And some of these vessels, like the sea jar, you can see that from above, it's just water swirling, like the big whirlpool, and then little ones coming off it. So if you've hung around rivers, if you've been rafting or just admiring, you'll see those same patterns playing out. And if it's a particularly windy or aggressive rapid, you'll see the froth and the little mist coming off the top. Next, please. So these are important elements, and even the action of ripples on water is expressed here. And like those other vessels, you can see there's triangular flagging with bold elements, there's little ripple effects, and the same froth that's shown. Next, please. And I like this one too, because it's another one that came from our Grand Canyon Archaeology project in the 2008 to 2010. And this one is, I think it's beautiful because if this vessel was intact and you had water in it, you could swirl it, and the action of water inside that vessel creates optical effects. In the stories of some of our Navajo ceremonies, there's specific types of pottery they would put underwater, and spinning that pottery underwater creates these special optical effects that were part of ceremonies and ritual. Next. So growing up in the desert, we're just thirsty people, and thirsty people see what they want. And I see Wendy's burgers, but on a hot day, I see moisture. I see water expressed. And working in a lab, sorting out thousands and thousands of pottery sherds, or helping do analyses, or archaeology sites with thousands of sherds, like these are the things I'm looking at. Is what are our ancestors thinking, and why are they thinking it? Next, please. So that same vessel we saw, you can see that the design isn't just to be seen from one side. It's supposed to be seen linear, like water moving along in the river from the side or from above. And then from above, if you fill that vessel with water, you get that same effect, the Coriolis effect of water swirling, either upwelling or in a whirlpool going down. Next, please. And some of them get pretty intricate. Some of them were probably represented not just on pottery, but textiles, like this particular vessel from also from here at Grand Canyon. They're thinking about waves, they're thinking about lightning, they're thinking about getting water to irrigated crops. Next. And it's just expressed everywhere. If you let yourself get thirsty, if you think about water and you look at a lot of the prehistoric art, you'll start to see it everywhere. And this particular flagstaff black and white to me shows water going to irrigation ditches, and then sort of the triangular scrolls could be takeouts, or it could just be a way to represent waves. Next. And it's everywhere. When you think of it linear, when you think of it, if you got this design and laid it out on a sheet of paper, then you start to see water on the horizon or water from above moving, meandering, serpentine. Next. And we use these designs to help us determine what time period these artifacts come from Pueblo 1, 750 AD to like 950, 1000 AD, or Pueblo 3, 1150 AD to like 1300. The design styles can tell us what people were thinking about during those particular time periods. And this one from late Pueblo 3, 1200 AD to about 1300 AD, you can see that the action of water flowing is more aggressive, it's bolder, it's emphasized there with the little, not quite zigzags, but little frothy tick lines going up to the top of the swirls, and then the little dots around the top, which some people could interpret as hail, some people could just interpret it as dots. There's probably specific meanings out there that I'm not aware of, but the way I'm looking at it, and that's how I see it. Next, please. And it's everywhere. We live on this landscape for a long time, 23,000 years of Native American occupation here in North America, and we're observant people. We study the landscape around us, we study rocks, we study trees. That study isn't just limited to modern science. To survive out here in the Southwest, to survive in this country, we needed to study the world around us. And those things we've learned, we've applied it to our art. Give me a second. Woo, someone's talking about me. That was a big sneeze there. Next slide, please. So those same elements, ripples, we see it in our prehistoric art. We see it in the form of cross-hatching. Next, please. And the meandering rivers, you can see that that's also expressed. We're showing ripples on washes. We're showing ripples on rivers. We're showing ripples in canal systems. Next, please. Growing up in Tuba City area with my grandparents, I always remember my grandfather, he opened the irrigation headgate down by Curly Valley across the road from the now burned Van's Trading Post. And like as an adult, it came back to me because I remember as a kid, I was making little boats and spending all day playing. I should have been helping my grandparents tend to the crops, but I was a kid. But I was making these boats and watching them float away. And it came to me one night as I was doing an analysis, and I just realized that some of these ripples, they're expressed in our crosshatch elements and some of the ceramic designs. They're showing us the things they saw in the past. Next, please. And it's just everywhere in our art. We look at Chaco black on white, the Wuji, the Goji black on white, we call it out here in the West. We look at Mesa Verde designs, Gallup, and all these designs have those same common expressions of ripples, of waves, of water running. Next, please. Next, please. Oh yeah, okay. So we think of water like that when it comes to ceramics. Oh, right there. Yeah, thank you. In some of these places, we have this far memory that goes back not just to our parents and our grandparents, but our ancestors, our Zaze in Navajo, we say, because Zaze, no Zaze, are 4 times great grandparents. And their stories and them before them interpreted over time tell us of water flowing, of water coming together at confluences and out of side canyons with just immense velocity and power. It's almost like the world was being both destroyed and created by 2 entities. We see the Coriolis effect and clockwise designs, and even the more very rare counterclockwise elements that happen out there. It's both creation and destruction happening at the same time. Next. And I see it everywhere I go because as a native person, as a native scientist, I'm not just looking at these strict scientific values that are written by non-native people. I'm looking at it through the eyes of my native culture. I'm looking at it through the eyes of neighboring tribes. I'm looking at it through the eyes of the young men and women I grew up with who taught me about their different tribal beliefs and all that. So I see rock art like this and it looks neat. It looks beautiful, just zigzag designs coming down. But looking at it from a more applying some native science to it, I guess. Next slide. So what you can't see is at the very top in the shadow is there's these little holes at the very tops of these long linear elements. And if you poured water in those holes, it runs down in those etchings. It runs down in the petroglyphs, in the designs, and it creates optical effects. It creates this interactive ritual. Next, please. And this isn't a design, this was just a unique erosional feature, but I just use it to illustrate that if you pour water in some of these things, it'll flow through those grooves in certain ways that native medicine people and ritual practitioners probably knew how to interpret. Next, please. Another good explanation of what I'm doing there, not just pouring my precious drinking water on the ground. Next, please. So we see it everywhere. We see water, that boulder image you see in the bottom, there's a swirl where the water is coming out of the ground. This particular boulder is right by a spring. So you can see what they're seeing, water coming out of the ground. There's animals coming to the water. There's certain species of birds coming to the site, and they're showing us what they're seeing. Next, please. Looking at rock art, even here at Grand Canyon, I see the expression of clouds, the upside down triangular elements, and I see lightning coming out. You can see the little zigzags coming out the bottoms there. And I think that 1,000 years ago, that was how this particular culture expressed rain. Next, please. And it's everywhere. If you see thunderclouds, you'll see a lot of it here in the Southwest. You'll see it like in that picture in the lower left. Step thundercloud and then rain coming straight down and lightning coming down zigzag. When you go to enough cliff dwellings and rock shelters, you see it seeping from the back. And when you go to analyze their ceramics, you see that same element zigzagging down, coming down from those rock bands. Next, please. One of the backs of one of the rock shelters. Next, please. So these are powerful. These bring life. These bring rain to crops. These fill up our water holes. These provide water for our springs, and they provide emotional and psychological relief and probably physiological relief on really hot days when we see these thunderheads coming. Next, please. Here's a good close-up of that one, the step element thundercloud with rain and lightning coming down. And you can see people are hunting underneath. There's animals moving around and people are following them. Next, please. Next. So these things are out there. When you stand by, the next time you're out by rock art, stand and look at it and look at the landscape around you. Look at what they're trying to tell you, because you will probably see it. Next, please. So standing near some of those, people call them snakes, but they're over these dry riverbeds. And you could see that they were showing the action of the water meandering down and different events and different rituals going on around it. Next. And possibly gardens, irrigation lines that are swervy. They're not like what we're used to with straight linear lines, but these curves could take a lot of velocity and energy out to keep water from just cutting down, and it would slow it down enough that it would bring water but not create a ditch. Next, please. And this one, it's important because at this particular boulder here, there's a little spring below it. So you can see in the rock art on the left that there's footsteps going up to the circle. So people are going toward it, and then the steps stop. There's two of them. So they're like, come up to the spring and then stop. There's a hand saying stop. Bring out your bow and arrow, and the animals will come here. So they're showing people where to hunt and how to hunt, probably to hide behind that specific boulder too. Next, please. So when we see these things, we got to see it from an interactive point of view, because it is telling us something. It is teaching us something. And this particular panel here from the Upper San Juan, next slide, please. It's not just something to look at, but it's something to teach us. They're actually showing us the technique that works for those particular areas. And in this case, waffle gardens. You can see on the right, waffle gardens from the early 1900s, and you can see on the left the same thing in prehistoric times. And you can actually see people playing their flutes. Playing music for crops can cause them to grow better, and it can cause them to be healthier. Next, please. And they're not just showing us the grid garden, but they're showing us the phases of germination. They're showing us how plants grow from seeds into mature plants. And it's pretty amazing, but you had to be a farmer. You had to have been thirsty to see these things. Next, please. And sometimes we see rock art. It's cool. We look out there, it's some sort of prehistoric hunting weapon. And we get focused on that when we should turn around or look around, and we'll see that that particular otlot dart actually points to a spring. During the Archaic period, when this otlot was drawn, it was probably 3000, 1000 BC, and there was still water flowing out of that spring. Next, please. So we're always thinking of rock art. It's swirling, it's out there, it's in our minds, it's coming up from underground. We see giant swirls in the sky. If we can look at satellite imagery of storm fronts coming in, we'll see these giant swirling masses coming toward us. And we know that swirls bring moisture. And that's the time to, in the old days, play their flutes and bring down the rain. Next, please. And there, something happened in my slides in transition, but these little round elements show that here's a spring and here's water coming out of it. And on the left, it's actually sideways, but there's a little seep in the back and water's coming down it, just like the rock art. Next, please. There's a good picture of the little spring and a little archaic Glen Canyon linear style mountain sheep going to drink from it. Next. Yeah, so these things, they swirl, they have meanings. There's like water coming up. We want water. We need water. We used to be water. And all of that is expressed in this once you know the stories behind it, once you know the culture and science behind it. Next, please. And one thing I like to point out is these things, the person that drew that last pot, they're looking down at where the little Colorado and the big Colorado come together. They're looking at swirls, they're looking at water all the time. And that's one of those aha moments. It's sacred to our ancestors and it's sacred to us. Next, please. So as we get out, yeah, next, please. As we get out and interact with artifacts, as we get out and interact with art, just keep that in mind is we're water people. Next, please. And these places where water occurs, where waters come together, where water comes together, where water emerges from, it's all part of our history, our cultural history, and our religion. Next, please. And okay, double size. Next, please. So we still remember it. We're still expressing it, even from our earliest days to now. And now we have even better ways to see it. We can zoom out in Google Earth and we can see water coming together. We can see confluence and we can see the elements of art that's shown to us on pottery, rock art, and sand paintings. Next, please. And we see it everywhere. Next. Where the water comes together is not just at Grand Canyon, but at places like Comb Ridge, where the San Juan and Comb Ridge meet. Next. And next. And the places where a lot of our Navajo culture developed, like around Shiprock and Farmington, where the waters come together. You can see those 4 rivers coming in, and that's expressed later in our art. Next. So these are ways that, and the same thing out in Winnetka, out there in south of Bloomfield. So hold on. So you can see all of that. Nope. By the way, over to the guy pointing. Forward, forward. So we see these things and we always remember it. We call these designs swirling logs, swirling rivers, where I guess in English it looks like a swastika, but for us that has a different meaning. That's an important cultural meaning and a good luck sign before World War II. Next. And as you look at these things, as you interact with these designs and you go to museums, you're out hiking and you see these and you admire them, but leave them alone, you'll have your own aha moments and you'll start to see four grid gardens surrounded by irrigation ditches with bringing water to it. Next. Or even parts of our tribal stories, if we know them, showing places like this planting house where the rivers come together. Next. Every culture is different. Every person is different. We have different educational backgrounds, different opinions, but we know that this water is important to us. We need to be protecting it, not just the water itself, but watersheds and the animals that need water, humans and our animals. So as we're out there, as I'm out there, as an archaeologist, as an educator, as a scientist, like I'm working to help future generations that realize that they're not just watching the world from the outside. We're not just watchers. We're not just at a game. Next, please. We're actually inside these designs. We need to change our perspective to think from outside the pot, inside the pot. And then we can see a whole new world open up, a whole new way of looking at how we relate to the past and the natural world around us in the present. So I will leave it at that and we'll take some questions. Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Nemesis Ortiz.
Thank you very much, Jason, for your presentation. I did want to start off with one question. Very fascinating subject that I haven't really heard much about up until now. So thank you again for a very interesting presentation. Do you have any advice or places that people could go to if they're interested and want to learn a bit more about this subject?
So, yeah, so I tell people as scientists, I tell any human that let your inner artist out. Be a dancer, be a singer, be a painter, be a writer, and that'll help you see the world from this like amazing new perspective. take that perspective, your artist perspective, and go to a museum, the Museum of Northern Arizona, the Arizona State Museum, and look at these things. Look at them from different angles. Look at them from the top. Look at them from the side, and you'll see what these prehistoric people are trying to tell us.
Great. And we do have another question here from Nemesis. Thank you for such an amazing presentation and images. It's awesome for us to think about water from an artistic and cultural perspective. What motivated you to work with pottery and pottery archaeology?
So I was a young backcountry interpretive ranger about 20 years ago at Navajo National Monument, and I went into that job with a lot of apprehension, being Navajo and knowing about uh, some of the things we do and some of the things we don't do. And I was stationed out at Quetzal, and went into it. I'm a scientist. I'm okay. I'll learn about this, and if I'm going to learn something, I have to learn how to be around it. So at Navajo National Monument, I interacted with the cliff dwellings. I interacted with the ceramics, with the realization that in order to learn about these, in order to tell the story, I needed to touch these things. I needed to be in this place that most Navajos don't go for those for a lot of different reasons. And I realized that just like a doctor or a nurse needs to deal with what's inside the human body, just like a soldier or a police officer needs to know how to use lethal force, I had to learn how to be with and interpret a lot of these artifacts that are out there. So that's what turned me into an archaeologist. My educational background was in environmental science, but that got me on the road that brought me here to working here at Grand Canyon and interpreting history, interpreting artifacts for modern Native people and help them understand their connections to the past.
Wow. Yes, again, very grateful for a fascinating topic there. It seems that that is all of our questions that we have right now. Oh, I think we
I
have
see
one
one more.
more incoming. Let's see.
So it's asking, is there any specific form of pottery or art that you're hoping to uncover that you haven't yet?
Oh,
I
okay.
think any good scientists, we're open to new data. We're open to new questions. We're open to adjusting what we know to accommodate new information that's coming out. So I think over time, there's going to be a lot more that we learn about ceramic design. There's going to be a lot more that we learn about ceramic art. And part of my job as a National Park Service archaeologist and as a Native American archaeologist is save what we have now, save that information for the future. Not just 7 generations, but 70 generations, 700 generations, those young future natives that we're going to be so far forward in time from now in the past that all that's going to be left for them is those artifacts, those cliff dwellings, those pueblos that are out there. And the interpreters like myself will be long gone, but hopefully that information will be out there that they can access and learn from.
This has been a very interesting perspective. It looks like I think we have another question here. Okay. And Jason, do you see that extra question
I
come in?
see that, Ed Nadine. I think that, so when I first started working my job as an archaeologist, I was working for the Navajo tribe, and I sort of struggled. And everyone told me keep culture and science separate, keep politics and science separate, keep all these things separate, and sort of went crazy for a while. But where I really came into finding a balance, where I really came into being what I think is a good native scientist is not trying to separate things, realizing that science and history are connected to the future. What I learned from the past helps me make decisions now, today, in 2020, and those decisions affect the future generations. So I'm keeping in mind the past, the present, and the future. And I'm also keeping in mind that my my field, preservation, my field, um, protecting sites, that's dependent on funding. That's dependent on educating people about what I do, about its value, so they can vote for people and encourage others to support preservation programs, to support protection programs. So I can't separate science from politics. I can't separate science from time. And I think that as a young native scientist, we really got to just sort of try to stop separating things and let that inner native out. And like, it's all together. It's imbalanced if we separate things, but we'll find that things quickly balance out when we allow ourselves to be an artist and a scientist. We allow ourselves to be a Native American and a scientist. We allow ourselves to use the best of both worlds, Western science, Native American science, and find ways to make it work and complement itself. And as a Navajo person, we have this long history that allows us to use what works and not use what doesn't work. And that's how we've survived for so long. And I might point out too that as Navajo, I'm Navajo. That's what I call myself. In English, it's Navajo, but I say the Nenishle. I'm Jason Nez, the Nenishle. I'm Navajo. But the Ne doesn't just mean Navajo. It doesn't mean Athabascan. There's a lot of cultural weight. There's a lot of colonial weight when we start applying those types of labels. When we say the Ne, we mean the people. And I look at myself, and if you look at yourself, your clans, you'll see that you're from these groups of people from different places. We come from a pueblo that's east of Santa Fe. We probably come from the Las Salinas Pueblo, south of Albuquerque. You can see that culturally I'm Navajo. I think Navajo, I look Navajo, but my background, who I am, is from all these other different groups. I'm Navajo, but I'm not Navajo. So if you think like that, we can find common ground with the people around us. We can find common relationships that we can work on issues together rather than let these arbitrary names like Navajo, Athabascan sort of cause these rifts and divisions. So think about that. To me, that's a traditional belief. I think that that's a balanced way to think about our personal relationship to the world, is admitting we're from all the people around us, and that's what makes us strong. That'll make us, help us be strong.
That's great. No, thank you again for sharing that. And let's see, that looks like that is all of our questions there. So again, thank you very much, Jason. That was a very fascinating presentation there. And thank you for everyone who's joined us today. If anyone is interested in checking out the WAM webinars that you may have missed, we're going to have all of these on our YouTube page. I'm just going to paste that link for anyone who's interested to check in that. Let's see. And also I'm going to share the link to our Arizona Waterfacts WAM website. We have lots of useful and interesting webinars planned over the next weeks. We're going to be adding that link so you can find some more information about the events coming up. Let's see. And with that, I'm going to end it. Thank you again very much, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
Thanks again.